The conventional wisdom of war is clear. A single soldier, alone and cut off, is a casualty waiting to happen. His duty, in such a desperate situation, is to evade, to hide, to survive. But what happens when one man decides that wisdom no longer applies? What happens when the order to retreat never reaches him, or he simply chooses to ignore it? This is not a story of a platoon, a company, or a battalion. This is the story of one rifleman against an army, a story of defiance so absolute it would bend the tactical reality of an entire battlefield. In the brutal winter of 1944, on a shattered bridge over a frozen river in the heart of France, one soldier made a decision. He refused to surrender. And in doing so, he fought a 3-day solo battle that would secure a crucial bridge for the advancing Allied forces. This is the forgotten story of a private's private war. Our story begins in the tumultuous wake of Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France in August 1944. By late November, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, the famed Rock of the Marne, was driving northward through the Vosges Mountains, facing fierce resistance from the German 19th Army. Their objective? Breach the Rhine Plain and threaten the German border. The terrain was a defender's dream: dense forests, steep hills, and icy rivers. One such river, the Thur, presented a major obstacle. Flowing through the town of Cernay, it was crossed by a single, vital concrete bridge on the road to the strategic city of Mulhouse. Guarding this approach was Task Force H, a battle-hardened but exhausted element of the 3rd Division's 30th Infantry Regiment. Among its ranks was Private First Class Arthur J. A.J. Miller, a 22-year-old farm boy from Iowa. Miller wasn't an officer. He held no command. He was a Browning automatic rifleman, a man whose job was to lay down suppressing fire to keep the enemy's heads down. He was known as a quiet, reliable soldier, more inclined to action than words. By November 25, 1944, Task Force H had secured the southern bank of the Thur and the Cernay Bridge after a sharp firefight. German forces had withdrawn to the northern bank, digging in on the wooded high ground that dominated the crossing. The bridge itself, though scarred by shell fire, was intact, a priceless asset for the American advance. Intelligence suggested a full German counterattack was imminent, aimed at recapturing the bridge and blowing it to pieces. The order to Task Force H was simple: hold the bridge at all costs. But as the gray afternoon light faded, a storm of steel was preparing to descend. The barrage begins. Artillery hellscape. The first shells began falling at dusk. Not the sporadic mortar fire of the previous days, but the concentrated, methodical bombardment of pre-planned artillery. The German 338th Infantry Division, reinforced with elements of a Panzer Grenadier unit, had zeroed in on the American positions. For 2 brutal hours, high-explosive and tree-burst shells turned the southern approach to the bridge into a hellscape of mud, splinters, and shrapnel. Radio communication with battalion headquarters crackled and died as wires were severed. Under cover of this barrage, German assault teams began their infiltration. Utilizing drainage ditches and the thick undergrowth along the riverbank, elite Stoßtruppen, stormtroopers, slipped across the Thur at points upstream and downstream of the bridge. Their mission? Envelop and destroy the American bridgehead. By 2100 hours, the sound of small arms fire erupted from the rear of Task Force H's perimeter. Green and red tracer rounds cut through the freezing fog. The dreaded cry of, "They're behind us!" spread through the American foxholes. The task force commander, realizing his position was being surrounded and in danger of annihilation, made the only decision he could. He gave the order for a fighting withdrawal to the village of Steinbach, a mile to the south. The retreat was chaotic, conducted under intense machine gun and mortar fire. In the confusion of the nighttime disengagement, amidst the deafening roar and the screams of the wounded, one man was missed. PFC Arthur Miller, manning an advanced listening post in a shell crater barely 50 yards from the bridge's southern abutment, never received the order. The runner meant for him was cut down by a German MG-42 burst. The sound of American weaponry to his rear faded, replaced by the guttural shouts of German and the distinctive crack of Mauser rifles. By midnight, the battlefield fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the moaning of the wind and the distant crackle of burning equipment. Miller was alone, completely, utterly alone. To his north, across the bridge, was a full German company digging in. To his south, the woods he believed were held by his comrades were now crawling with enemy patrols. He was behind enemy lines, with only his BAR, 12 magazines, 4 grenades, his .45 pistol, and the bitter cold for company. His choices were stark: attempt a suicidal dash through enemy lines, surrender, or hold his ground. As the first gray light of November 26th crept over the Vosges, Miller made his choice. He would stay. He dragged the body of the fallen runner into his crater, taking the man's extra ammunition and rations. He carefully arranged his magazines, wiped the freezing moisture from his BAR's action, and settled in to wait. He didn't know it, but the entire timetable for the 3rd Division's push on Mulhouse now depended on the actions of one forgotten private. At 0630 hours, he saw movement on the bridge. A 5-man German patrol, confident the area was clear, was walking brazenly down the center of the structure, inspecting it for demolition charges. Miller let them come. He waited until they were halfway across, their silhouettes perfect against the dawn sky. Then he opened fire. The sustained burp of the bar echoed against the concrete girders. The patrol was cut down in seconds. Miller's solo battle had begun. The German reaction was swift and violent. A machine gun nest on the northern bank opened up, stitching the ground around Miller's crater with bullets. Mortar rounds began to walk their way toward him. For Miller, the world shrunk to the circumference of his hole. Time lost meaning. It was measured in magazines expended, in the slow arc of the winter sun, in the creeping cold that seeped through his wool uniform. He would fire short, controlled bursts at any target that presented itself: a helmet peeking over a parapet, a squad moving too boldly along the riverbank. Then he would duck, change position within his crater, and wait. By midday, the Germans concluded they were facing a stubborn but isolated rearguard. They attempted a direct assault. A squad of 12 Panzer Grenadiers stormed across the bridge, firing from the hip. Miller rose to his knees, braced the bar on the crater's lip, and emptied a full 20-round magazine into the tightly packed group. The attack faltered, then broke, leaving twisted forms on the bridge deck. But Miller was paying a price. A ricochet had gouged a furrow across his helmet, leaving his ears ringing. His fingers were numb, and his throat was raw from cordite and cold. He was down to 8 magazines. The afternoon brought a new kind of terror: psychological warfare. Using a loudspeaker, a German officer with perfect English called out to him, "American soldier, you are alone. Your comrades have fled. You have fought bravely. Surrender now, and you will be treated with honor. Continue this foolishness, and you will be annihilated." Miller's response was another burst of fire aimed at the sound of the voice. Night fell again, a blessing and a curse. It hid him from direct observation, but it also allowed enemy probes to get dangerously close. He could hear them whispering in the dark, hear the scrape of boots on gravel just yards from his position. He dared not sleep. He survived on captured German Zwieback crackers and sips of icy water from his canteen. The second dawn, November 27th, revealed a grim sight. The Germans had used the night to reinforce. He could now see the outlines of at least 2 machine gun positions and a PaK-40 anti-tank gun being emplaced to cover the bridge. They were settling in for a siege, but they were also preparing for something bigger: the arrival of their own reinforcements to cross that bridge. Miller's crisis was absolute. He was surrounded, low on ammunition, freezing, and suffering from exhaustion. The enemy knew his approximate location and was bringing heavier weapons to bear. His very existence defied military logic. Yet, every shot he fired pinned the German company to its positions. Every hour he survived forced the enemy to dedicate more men and resources to eliminating one man, delaying their own plans to use the bridge for a counterattack. He had become a ghost, a phantom in a crater, holding an entire company at bay through sheer, terrifying unpredictability. The bridge, for now, remained in a state of precarious neutrality, neither fully under German control nor usable by them. But Miller was running out of time, ammunition, and strength. The final assault, he knew, was coming. That assault began in the early afternoon of November 27th. No longer willing to waste men in direct charges, the German commander unleashed the coordinated bombardment. The PaK-40 gun, designed to kill tanks, began firing high-explosive shells at Miller's sector. The explosions were cataclysmic, showering him with dirt and debris. Machine guns laid down suppressing fire so heavy he could not raise his head. Under this umbrella of fire, two separate platoons began a slow, deliberate advance from the flanks, using the riverbank and ruined buildings for cover. This was it. The pincer was closing. Miller lobbed his last two grenades in the direction of the advancing footsteps, the blasts momentarily halting the eastern group. He switched to his .45 pistol, his BAR ammo nearly gone. And then a new sound cut through the din of battle. A deep, rumbling roar from the south, the sound of diesel engines and clattering tracks. Miller, pressed into the mud at the bottom of his crater, feared German armor. But the sound was followed by a sound he had not heard in 3 days, the distinctive crack boom of an American 75mm tank gun. Sherman tanks of the 756th Tank Battalion, spearheading the 30th Infantry Regiment's counterattack to retake Cernay, had arrived. What happened next was a scene of surreal confusion for the German company. Believing the solitary American had been a diversion for a larger force, they were now caught between a relentless ghost in a crater to their front and a full-scale American armored assault from their rear. Their carefully laid positions, all facing south towards Miller, were now exposed. Chaos erupted. The German commander, unsure of the size of the force attacking him, gave the order to fall back across the bridge. But as his men poured onto the structure, Miller made his final, pivotal play. With his last magazine of BAR ammunition, he rose from his crater one final time. Ignoring the bullets snapping past him, he poured a sustained, withering fire into the mass of retreating soldiers on the bridge. It was not aimed fire. It was an act of pure, focused disruption. He sowed panic and turned an orderly withdrawal into a bloody rout. Men stumbled, fell, and dove for cover that wasn't there. This devastating enfilade fire from the one direction that Germans had considered secure was the breaking point. The retreat disintegrated. The American Shermans, reaching the southern end of the bridge, found the path cleared by the actions of one man who had refused to yield. They rolled across the Thur unopposed, their infantry support sweeping the northern bank. The crucial bridge, the objective for which Task Force H had been driven back days before, was captured intact, its demolition wires cut. The path to Mulhouse was open. As the GIs secured the area, a tank commander spotted a figure slowly, painfully climbing out of a crater near the bridge. It was PFC Arthur Miller, filthy, bleeding from his scalp wound, his uniform in tatters, empty weapons in his hands. He was, as one sergeant reported, the only thing standing between the Germans and this bridge. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Private First Class Arthur J. Miller was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation detailed his magnificent courage, supreme devotion, and how his alone stand for 72 hours against repeated attacks enabled his regiment to counterattack and retake the vital position. He survived the war, returning to Iowa, a humble hero who rarely spoke of his 3-day war. When asked, he would simply say, "They left me there to do a job. I just hadn't finished it yet. His legacy is one of transcendent defiance. He proved that the will of a single determined soldier could influence the outcome of a larger battle. He was not a general moving divisions on a map. He was a man who, through sheer force of character, held a single point on that map against all odds. The Cernay Bridge was more than a concrete span. It became a monument to the idea that spirit can, at times, overcome sheer materiel. Miller's story was circulated throughout the 3rd Division as the ultimate example of tenacity, a lesson that the individual, even when lost and abandoned, still holds power in his hands. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War, a story not of grand strategy, but of individual resolve, not of an army, but of one soldier who refused to surrender. Subscribe to WW2 Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.